Good day, ladies and gentlemen. During this lecture, we will be covering accidents and their effects. We will be deviating slightly from the material in your text to provide current information. Most of the data will still use the book as its source. However, you should note that any exam or quiz could refer to lecture notes. This is the best means to keep the material current while still using the text for general safety management. For example, accidents have unfortunately moved from the fourth leading cause of death in the U.S. to number 3, according to the National Safety Council. This is only exceeded by heart disease and cancer. If we were to limit the age group to those between 15 and 44, then accidents move to the leading cause of death. The total cost of accidents in 2018 was nearly $600 billion. This includes medical expenses, property damage, including fire and smoke damage, increased insurance premiums, lost wages, as well as other indirect costs. Off-the-job accidents accounted for more than 80% of the injuries requiring medical consultation and were credited with 9 of 10 fatalities. Although you would expect the leading cause of off-the-job deaths to be motor vehicle accidents, the leading culprit is actually poisoning, which includes drug overdoses. While 70% of the total cost for accidents were due to off-the-job injuries, the remaining injuries that were work-related cost companies $170 billion. This trend is decreasing, but the number of on-job fatalities is still nearly 4,500 individuals. Of note, that is 15 times the number of deaths due to natural disasters for the same year. And in the one we're referencing here, 2018, during that year there were 296 deaths due to natural disasters. Historically, the prevailing view was that accident prevention programs were just too costly. Safety precautions took time, which took away from getting the job done. Safety equipment cost extra money, putting up scaffolding, using personal protective equipment, and so forth. The contemporary view is that accidents themselves are too costly, and accident prevention makes economic sense. This is due to you have no lost time accidents, fewer medical costs and compensation, reduced training costs to replace injured workers, and it improves the company's image. Accident prevention which is normally advocated on a moral basis, is now justified in terms of return of investment. Recall the public outcry prior to workers' compensation leaving men, women, and children maimed was a moral argument. Now a sloppy safety record is shared throughout the world within seconds of its discovery. Some of those indirect costs are going to be associated with losses in sales or confidence due to the company's inability to take care of its employees and workers. Therefore, other people that are bidding with this company or may consider bidding with the company may refuse to deal with them for future projects. Looking at the economics of workplace accidents, we've seen workplace accidents cost over $170 billion annually. This comes in at $1,100 per worker, with $41,000 per injury requiring medical consultation. The cost to the companies due to fatalities is approximately $1.2 million per death. Although we hope the outlook would be better than when the text was published, 2018 did have a little anomaly in bumps of fatalities. Combined with mishaps in the home and public, these eclipse motor vehicle accidents as 3 times as common as incidents in the workplace. Workplace accidents barely exceed the cost associated with public accidents. The leading cause of death in public places is falls, followed closely by poisoning. Falls and poisoning together accounted for 66% of all public deaths. Drowning and choking weighed in at 7% of the fatalities in public. Our updated cost of workplace incidents was based on the 2018 report, and it does not reflect all the categories that we had covered in 2017. Wages and productivity suffered nearly $53 billion in cost, and only exceeded by insurance and administrative costs of approximately $58 billion. Of course, medical expenses are going to be a major factor, but these were quickly followed by indirect costs. Those costs are not directly attributed to the accident. We'll wrap it up with property damage and losses due to the fire, and then we have $13.1 billion. As I mentioned earlier, the leading cause of preventable death is poisoning. Simply put, poisoning is the ingesting of a solid, liquid, or gaseous substance via inhalation or absorption through the skin. This category includes drugs and medicine overdoses, but it does not include poisoning from spoiled foods, which are classified as a disease death. Unfortunately, this category covers 37% of fatalities with nearly 63,000 deaths. Next, we have motor vehicles, weighing in at 24% of preventable fatalities, with falls following closely behind at 22%. With the top three accounting for 83% of accidental deaths, the remaining categories drop drastically. When moving into the single digits, suffocation, or more specifically mechanical suffocation, is the leading cause of fatalities for children under 1 year of age, and 80% of all infant deaths. This category includes the inability to breathe due to strangulation, smothering by bedclothes, or plastic bags, as well as other similar materials. Suffocation can also be involved in the blockage of an airway by an ingested object. Drowning and fires each weighed in, contributing to 2% of preventable deaths. Approximately 1% of the fatal accidents in the other specified category can be classified to include electrocution, explosive blast, and exposure to radiation. These fatal accidents are not elsewhere classified and also produce 1% that may not include accidents not classified for lack of sufficient data. Natural or environmental accidents from disasters such as wildfires, avalanches, hurricanes or tornadoes, winter storms, excessive heat, lightning strikes, etc. account for 1% of all fatalities. And the final member of the top 10 preventable deaths is being struck by an object. Although 0.5% may be seen as small, that still accounts for 827 deaths in 2018 alone. Many of the fatalities occur at construction sites, with the victim being hit by an object falling from a height or being struck by a heavy object that is being transferred. Being crushed by an object being felled, such as a tree, also is included in this group. Other preventable deaths included here are the accidental discharge of firearms, which resulted in 486 deaths in 2018. However, this group has decreased sharply due to firearm safety training and improved storage of firearms. Air transportation traffic accidents seldom garner much national attention unless it's a commercial carrier. However, in 2018, we saw 381 deaths in general aviation. Medical complications, not including medical errors, unfortunately have a high fatality rate. But a death due to the body's reaction through medical treatment such as infections, a compromised immune system, blood clots, etc. And our last category is interaction with machinery. Although guards and shields prevent many of these accidents, humans still discover ways to endanger themselves. As stated in the previous lesson, machines don't care if you violate the safety zones and walk into their area. They will continue to work if the safeties have been disabled. And they will also continue to operate while a two-ton arm swings around and splatters you into the wall. These threats seem to be reduced as we see robots with additional sensors working alongside humans. Or we totally isolate the robot by putting them in separate cages or isolated rooms. The deaths in these categories combined, there were 9,100 deaths between all of the subcategories outside of the top 10. So coming back to looking at where most of your age groups are, and we're looking at just isolating the causes of death for ages 25 to 44. And again, 2018 information. Accidents now move to the top of the fatalities with nearly 34% of motor vehicle accidents claiming nearly half of the accidental deaths. Follow that with cancer and heart disease, and we come up to 41%. Unfortunately, suicide claims another 13.6%, which is a very good argument to have your company address mental health issues. Murders account for 8.5%, thus security should also have a workplace very close with safety and health to address workplace violence. AIDS, HIV, chronic liver disease, stroke, diabetes, flu, influenza. We can now add COVID as part of the number 10 area there. But all of these combined in 2018 gave us 19% of the fatalities. So obviously accidents are going to have a serious negative impact on production, quality, and the ability to compete in today's global workplace. One of the most overlooked effects is the detriment to employee morale, which directly impacts production and quality. Anytime a worker is injured on the job, others will reflect on how that accident could have happened to them. They will reflect sympathy for the injured person and will increase the closer you get to where it actually happened, then the closer that sympathy is going to be felt, as well as the wariness around whatever piece of machinery, etc., caused the problem. If the worker themselves was well liked, this negative morale is going to increase greater. Accidents are one of the causes of death and injury that most companies can easily control. Companies with an effective safety program should be able to reduce accidents within their facilities. Continuous inspection of work processes and equipment will positively affect safety. Companies with a high-risk workplaces should have the strictest inspection criteria. For example, military weapon systems have daily systems operational tests, not only to ensure that the weapon is functioning when needed, but also so it will prevent a hazard to the unit using it. And we'll talk about this later on when we cover robotics. One of the biggest kills by a robot was due to a automatic gunnery system that malfunctioned and during the testing and shot 33 of the soldiers in the company. So this is a big concern. As far as any of you that may have been in the Navy or other fields, this cartoon is just for fun. A gun mount actually can't go that far around. So deaths on the job have decreased as we become more safety aware. With the creation of OSHA back in 1970, actually happily implementing it in 1971. We've recently oscillated to around 5,000 deaths. Across all industries, workplace accidents have led motor vehicle accidents, primarily in transportation. So most of your fatalities are going to come due to some mode of travel. Fatal falls, slips, violence by persons or animals come in at violence by person or animal. Now, number two, fatal falls, slips, and trips. That used to be the leading cause with the fatal falls. We're getting more aware of what we're doing around there, and we're mechanically reducing the possibility of these falls. Many increases in workplace violence were driven by an increase of suicide on the job. Additionally, the reversals in these positions was driven by an 11% decrease in falls, slips, and trips. Most common contact with objects or equipment is being struck by them, followed by being caught or compressed, and then we go to crushed under a collapsing structure, equipment, or material. And backing up just a little bit there, contact with an object, this is where you see a lot of the robotics injuries and deaths occurring, because that is an arm that's just swinging along doing its job, and if you override the safeties, it's going to hit somebody. Harmful substances or an environment includes anything led by non-medical use of drugs, alcohol, or unintentional overdoses. Exposures to electricity, temperatures extremes, oxygen deficiencies, exposure to radiation, noise, all of these come in as part of the environment. So 62, although fires and explosions accounted for 2.2%, 62% of those fatalities were related to explosions. That means we're getting better at doing this, and we're getting better at avoiding fires, although we commonly expect these explosions to be triggered by a demolition event. The overwhelming majority of these deaths are caused by rupture of pressurized vessels. So let's say you overfilled a canister that had propane in it. You exceeded its limits, although they're really well designed, and that ruptures. When that happens, those pieces are going to come flying out. Anybody in the vicinity is going to be hit by that shrapnel. Not to mention any liquids or gases that may be inside of the container. Demolitions and blasting explosions took only a single life in 2018. So of these 115 deaths, demolition only accounted for one of them. Dust explosions is another one that's concerned with. For those of you that haven't grown up on a farm, one of the things that we tend to look at or saw early on is as you put these grains in a silo, more dust will build up in them. So that dust becomes explosive in the right conditions and can blow the silos up. So granary bins are a big concern, but there are other explosions that could be caused due to dust. If you're one of the individuals heading into the construction field, OSHA has identified falls as the leader with 36%, struck by objects, electrocution, and caught in between are the big four fatal accidents inside of construction. As I stated, 36% of those were due to fall. Struck by an object comes in at 10%. Electrocutions follows at 9%. And the caught in between, which is being caught between or pressed by equipment or objects, came in at 2%. So the listing here is basically just the Bureau of Labor Statistics living up to their name. This fatality rate, if you look at it, you'd think, well, there must have been thousands of logging workers died, but the injury rates are per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. So in reading the chart, it's basically what's your percentage of percentage-wise dangerous in this job. The fatality rates for any industry will change if you improve safety awareness. Bureau of Labor Statistics stated that rankings per 100,000 were going to be led by logging workers. So even though we have 270 protective service workers, which would be firefighters, law enforcement, lifeguards, etc., were 270 killed in the line of duty in 2018, there were 3.4 million protective service officers employed that year, while loggers only employed 40,000 workers, but they topped the chart with 56 deaths. So statistics, right? From this list, the larger number of fatalities was truck drivers and driver sales. If we actually look at the numbers, they led with 966 deaths. So you're seeing that way down on the list. Now, there are a lot of drivers and salesmen out there. That population with 966 deaths is 3.5 million individuals. Agricultural workers, farmers, ranchers, they came in next at 257 deaths, but that was among 2 million workers. And rounding out those top three right there was construction workers at 240 deaths. This included roofers. Right. But again, 7.2 million employees pushes it down on this list as far as the occupation, the risk at doing the occupation. Workers were also cut out of construction, though, to put them on this list as having a high fatality rate. But from a pool of 160,000 roofers, we had 96 deaths. And if you have any questions on those and how that came up, just drop me a line, because I know a lot of people look at these and go, well, what's the safest industry to go into? This is telling you what your percentages are given that particular industry. So let's look at some of the costs to a businesses due to not actually paying attention to what was going on. The first one was the Arco Chemical Company in Channelview, Texas. Experienced an explosion in July 1990 that left 17 people dead and an additional 5 injured. This was called the $100 million tragedy. What happened was a wastewater storage tank exploded during the restart of a compressor. And Acro was fined $3.84 million for failing to safeguard its employees. Follow that, we have USX Steel settled a 1989 health and safety violation charge relating to numerous abuses at the Fairfield Hill Steel Plant and Clairton Coke Works located in Pennsylvania. Violations included hearing impairment, electrical hazards, failures to communicate hazards to workers, improper crane operation, and record-keeping failures. 19 worker deaths were attributed to violations stretching back to 1972. The original fine proposed by OSHA in November 1989 was $7.3 million. BASF Corporation inside Cincinnati had a chemical plant explosion, killing 2 people, injuring 17. It resulted in extensive property damage for the surrounding neighborhood. The fire and explosion was triggered by a vessel in overpressurization during cleaning in a resin plant. OSHA proposed a $1.1 million fine due to 133 safety violations and 104 willful violations. Among these violations, OSHA noted a lack of automatic controls, such as high temperature or pressure alarms and shutdown devices, which would have worked to prevent this accident. Also, a failure to require operators to be present at the units during all times of operation and absence of written procedures for cleaning with solvents. In addition to these fines, employers have incurred a lot of costs due to for safety corrections, medical treatment, survivor benefits, death and burial costs, and other indirect costs. Among those indirect costs are settlements with damages to the community, surrounding community, as in the case of BASF, agreeing to pay $15.5 million to as many as 2,500 people within a 3-mile radius of their Evington's plant. The trends in the rates of accidents is actually going downward. Between 1912 and 1998, accidental work deaths per 100,000 has been reduced by 81%. This occurred even though the workforce has tripled. So many more people inside the workforce, and we're getting better at doing it. Production has increased by 11 times. So amazing increase in production. And workplace injuries, we mentioned before, cost $171 billion or $1,100 per workers. Many safety and health professionals believe that a major cause of these accidents and injuries on jobs will damage morale. I believe there's a lot to support that. The greater the injury, the more sway it will have on other individuals inside the plant and the employees. They're not going to be able to work at their full potential if they are having low morale due to somebody being injured on the job. Additionally, if that particular person happened to be somebody that makes the whole area light up, you're not doing yourself any favor by allowing them to become injured. The time lost because of work injuries is a big one. Any injury requiring medical intervention is going to result in lost time. In 2018, debilitating injuries resulted in an average of 2.8 days lost per 100,000 workers. That equates to a direct loss in productivity of approximately 46 million hours. Additional costs were also associated with losses due to medical checkups after an injured employee returns to work. Accidents within the year, the effects carry forward from previous year to the next year and continue to cause lost time until morale comes back up and people can feel safe on the job. So the types of accidents causing these work injuries, when evaluating these, we need to classify them in order to ensure the event is not repeated. One of the things drilled into pilots during training is 95% of aircraft crashes are due to human error. The pilot goofed. This is reflected in industrial accidents as well as studies linking more than 85% of industrial accidents were due to human error. The NCS has determined that the most common injuries keeping workers away from work are sprains, strains or tears, soreness or pain, cuts, lacerations, or punctures. According to Liberty Mutual Insurance, these disabling injuries were obtained in the following manner in the workplace and remain relatively constant. The greatest cost at $13.7 billion is overexertion from an outside source. This would include things like lifting, pushing, pulling, holding, carrying, or throwing. Those account for 33.54% of all injuries. Being struck by an object comprises 26% of workplace injuries and totals to $5.3 billion in cost. This group is dominated by objects falling from above, although being hit by entering an area where equipment and other objects are in transit also impacts workers. We're going to probably see an increase in this if we don't take care of the robotics area because, as I've stated before, the arm will swing around and hit you and not even know it did it. Falls are classified into two categories. Those would be falls from the same level or a lower level. And the same level would be things such as tripping or slipping on a wet floor and then impacting the floor as you come down. These incidents are 25.8% of the injuries and cost $11.2 billion. Falls to a lower level from a ladder or a platform accounted for another $5.9 billion in costs. Other exertions or body reactions would occur if the worker overextends or is reaching and suffering harm while bending, climbing, walking, crawling, or twisting. These injuries are more prevalent on older or out-of-shape workers, and the financial impact was around $4.2 billion. Roadway act. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Roadway incidents occur involving motor vehicles, added to another $3.2 billion, and reflect accidents driving on highways and motorways. We've already covered the cost of falling, but there are also trips and slips. These would be times when you slipped on something, but you didn't actually contact the floor. You didn't go all the way down. However, these injuries tend to involve twisting or otherwise forcing the body into extensive range of motion in order to prevent the fall. Older workers are more susceptible to these accidents, which can result in pulled muscles, torn ligaments, sprained ankles or wrists. Injuries of this type, $2.3 billion. Caught in or compressed deals with getting trapped by machinery such as gears or rollers. This is coming in at a price tag of $2.1 billion. Striking an object or equipment is usually involved an accident. We've always all bumped into something, but hopefully you haven't been struck by something so hard that would require medical attention. This category includes events such as walking into machinery, doors, office furniture, open drawers, and again, $2 billion was lost in order to train workers to maintain situational awareness and not walk into things. Other common injuries in the workplace include rubbing or abrasions. I think I'm a little bit out of order here. Abrasions are pretty clear. There we go. Rubbing or abrasions are pretty common in any kind of situation. The difference between abrasions and rubbing occurs deeper on the tissue. It does a trauma, usually due to bumping into an object. You hit it, you don't notice any bruise, but it's still sore because it's further down in the body. It doesn't show up. An abrasion is just as it states. This is something that's rubbed against the skin and left an opening there. Not deep enough to really be considered a cut, but there's still damage due to something being dragged across the body. Threats in the workplace can also include exposure to environmental hazards such as chemicals and other caustic compounds, airborne particulates, vapors, exposure to temperature extremes, radiation, and compressed gases. For construction people, radiation is one you have to worry about, not because you're next to a reactor or medical equipment, but because the sun is going to damage the workers if they are not properly cared for. Unfortunately, any business is going to have limited resources if they wish to remain competitive in the marketplace. Therefore, it is important to identify the most likely injuries inside the workplace, as well as the area of the body most likely to receive that injury. As bipedal creatures, we are extremely susceptible to injuries to our back. This vulnerability is also reflected in the neck. Our eyes can only provide a forward field of view of 120 degrees, and we have a vertical vision arc of 150 degrees. This leaves our head at risk from anything outside this range of motion, which is why you need to keep your head on a swivel and maintain situational awareness. Arms and legs, as our other extremities, can also be easily trapped or compressed, caught by objects, or seized by moving equipment. This can result in broken bones, joints, muscle strains, torn muscles, tendons, and ligaments, as well as nerve damage. Repetitive injuries to joints may also trigger a degenerative joint disease. At the end of our arms and legs, we have our hands, thumbs, fingers, feet, toes. These are commonly injured and becomes target for the equipment. Hands and fingers are commonly trapped due to careless or inattentive workers or subject to burns from a heat source and chemical. The latter injuries can be avoided by wearing proper gloves for the task, while the former requires simply improving awareness. Feet and toes often become targets for rolling stock or equipment, as well as dropped objects. Remaining out of the traffic lane is the optimum precaution for the former, while a good pair of safety boots will reduce the severity of the injuries due to the latter. Chemical burns are only a small percentage of burn injuries, yet they have a disproportionate number of deaths. It is mostly due to the fact that chemicals gain so much deeper access to the body, inflicting damage well beyond the site where it was entered. As expected, most chemical burn incidents can be found in manufacturing, while the remainder are spread among services and trades, agriculture, and construction. Caustic chemicals may include cleaning compounds composed of acid-based and alkaline soaps, as well as detergents. Solvents such as degreasers are popular for cleaning machinery. You will find calcium hydroxide in cement and plaster, while potassium hydroxide is used as a drain cleaner. Yet it can also be found in oven cleaners, lotions, and shampoos. Many of you are familiar with the highly corrosive fluid sulfuric acid, which is present in batteries, again in drain cleaners, and cleaning agents and fertilizers. The signs of chemical burns are redness, irritation, and burning at the contact site, pain or numbness at the point of contact, blisters or black dead skin, coughing or shortness of breath, and changes in vision if it enters the eyes through fumes or contact. Severe cases can result in shortness of breath, severe cough, headaches, muscles twitching or seizing, faintness, weakness or dizziness, low blood pressure or irregular heartbeat, and cardiac arrest. Chemical burns are easily avoidable, as long as workers are trained to respect the hazard. Any container with a concentrate of caustic chemicals should be properly marked in accordance with the globally harmonized system, GHS, of chemical classifications and labeled identifying the contents, the physical and health hazards, the environmental hazards, classifications of mixtures, and substitute substances. A safety data worksheet would be attached if room allows on the container, or should be stored in a convenient place within the workspace. The GHS markings from left to right are harmful, health hazard, toxic, a very common one, corrosive, explosive, and another common one, flammable. Workers who will be working with chemicals should be well informed of the hazards, as well as trained to how safely operate any equipment used in the handling. If any personal protective equipment or handling equipment shows wear or damage, it should be replaced immediately. And we will review chemical safety in more detail in Chapter 20. Approximately 40% of heat and burn injuries occur within manufacturing and may be categorized as thermal, chemical, electrical, or sun exposure. The most common are thermal due to exposure to open flames, molten metals, petroleum asphalts, or contact with steam or extremely hot water. These burns also provide the added risk of a smoke or vapor inhalation, causing further damage to the lungs. Workers should be restricted from hazardous areas until they are thoroughly trained on the process and can recognize what procedures are necessary to reduce the threat. The primary factors contributing to thermal injuries are failure to enforce safe practices and procedures. Unfortunately, humans tend to push the limits or lose focus on the heat hazards around them until it's too late. Frequently, this is due to the employee not being familiar with the threat and substituting their own common knowledge in an unfamiliar situation. Of course, part of employee training should include the use of personal protective equipment. Failure to use personal protective equipment or improperly using them only complicates the situation, particularly in an emergency. An often ignored threat to damage, as I mentioned before, was solar radiation. Workers should limit skin exposure using light clothing or applying sunscreen. We will discuss fire safety and temperature injuries again in chapters 16 and 19. Repetitive strain injuries are typically associated with the soft tissues of hands, arms, neck, and shoulder, and are frequently caused by recurrent movements in the associated joint. Symptoms of repetitive strain injuries include numbness, a tingling sensation, or pain in the extremities such as fingers, hands, or wrists, forearms, elbows, neck, shoulders, etc. The most common repetitive injury is carpal tunnel syndrome, but there are several others such as tennis elbow tendonitis and the rotator cuff and bursitis. With increased application of computers in all industries, the overall incident rate for CTS has increased at a rate of more than 15% per year. We will discuss these type of injuries when covering ergonomics in Chapter 10. For a company to survive and thrive, they must be able to produce a profit. Managers, particularly safety managers, must be able to communicate losses due to accidents far exceed the costs associated with preventing them. You cannot simply use global safety costs, but should be able to relate the threat to your specific industry. Your credibility will be suspect if your company is primarily making teddy bears and you relate the risk of ordnance manufacturing. When estimating the cost of the companies, it is practical to separate likely threats into categories of insured and non-insured. You may work with the accounting department to determine the losses covered by insurance. Uninsured costs are a bit more difficult as you must screen and classify previous accidents at your business as well as those at associated businesses. A good way to classify accidents is to separating them according to their cost on humans and the facility or the facility's equipment. Your text suggests the four categories developed by Professor Ronald L. Simone of Michigan State College. The classifications help in determining uninsured costs. We'll begin with level 4. These are incidents that do not require medical attention from a physician and may incur less than $100 in damage. Result in loss of 8 hours or more work. Level 4. Level 3 accidents will require local first aid, experience less than $100 in damages, and less than 8 hours of lost time work. Level 2 necessitates treatment by an off-site physician. And level 1 accidents are those that incur permanent, partial, or temporary total disability and inflict lost work days. To calculate your uninsured cost, divide the accidents into the 4 classes, compute the total for each one of the classes, divide by the number of accidents in that class to determine the average uninsured cost for each class. OSHA further classifies accidents based on the nature of the injury or illness, the part of body affected, source and secondary source of the injury or illness, and the type of event or exposure. it is very likely your company will have their own tailored classification method. This chart we're looking at here, this is figure 2.5 from your text, and it's recording our class 1 accidents and breaking them up into different costs as we go down through here. The text does not specify what the cost groups are, just A, B, C, and so forth, but typically these are lost work hours, medical costs, administrative costs, increased insurance premiums, property damage, losses due to fire, as well as indirect costs. And this investigation has determined these accidents cost the company $554.23 in uninsured costs. This resulted in an average of $138.56 per accident for Class 1. Using this information as an accurate cost estimate of an accident, fairly accurate predictions can be made. This method would be expanded to other classes as well to produce a relatively accurate prediction for each class and derive a total estimated cost due to the impact of mishaps on the company. As previously stated, the costs related to workplace accidents, injuries, and incidences fall into broad categories. First, these being lost work hours due to injured or impacted personnel being unable to work or working at a reduced capacity, as well as lost production due to damaged equipment or manufacturing lines. Medical costs can be extensive depending on the severity of the injury. A scrape requiring a Band-Aid from the first aid kit is much cheaper than an injury requiring surgery and rehabilitation. Property damage can be extended beyond the facility depending upon the severity of the accident. Collateral damage to the neighborhood community is likely with an explosion or large fires. Fire losses will extend beyond the equipment and property. Can also include persons or objects affected by the heat or property and equipment damaged by smoke and other particulars released by the fire. The insurance premiums and administrative costs. Insurance premiums would be in this category. They're surely to increase to hedge the insurer's cost. Administration would be figuring out the accident's investigation, recording, safeguarding against future occurrences. These additional costs may be incurred due to the need to bring in outside consultation or investigators, as well as produce the required documents for various agencies such as OSHA. And the indirect costs may be apparent or hidden. Lost productivity not only during the accident window, but also reduction in worker efficiency due to decreased morale. Overtime may be required to meet deadlines after an accident. Staff costs necessary to investigate the accident itself, as well as develop response and precautions going forward with record keeping. If the workers are temporarily or permanently lost, training and its associated learning curve will be necessary for their replacements. An unpredictable hidden cost would be an impact on public perception of the company's products. Accidents do not inspire confidence, and indirect costs can add 20% or more to the cost of an accident. To determine the cost due to lost time, compile the total number of lost hours for the period, multiply that by the applicable loaded labor rate. Then the loaded labor rate would be the employee's hourly rate plus benefits. So in this particular one, this example in the text shows an employee has lost 386 lost work hours in the fourth quarter. Of approximately 10 weeks with benefits, basically the whole quarter, the employee earned an hourly wage of $10.70 with benefits valued added at 20%, so the loaded labor becomes $13.48. This provides a total lost time cost of $5,203.28. For this particular one, they said the employee also suffered a dislocation. National Safety Council estimates it would cost about $36,000 in medical treatment and another $23,000 for indemnity or legal liability to cover the extra cost associated with a medical recovery. Thus, total medical costs are going to come to $59,000. Insurance premiums will increase following an accident, but it greatly depends on the policy that the company holds, their own safety record, as well as the response of the company to the accident. The cost of accidents greatly exceed what's on the surface. We've already discovered that. Following the immediate chaos of any major accident and emergency response, the line or the process is shut down, and the area must be cleaned up and recovered to restore a safe environment. The shutdown will continue until the accident is investigated and data is recovered. Analysis of each accident is understandably will vary depending on the extent of the damage caused by the accident or the difficulty in discovering the cause of the accident. A missing guard resulting in a worker becoming entangled in a machine or a belt is relatively easily discovered. But what about an explosion that engulfed a whole portion of the factory? Until the cause is discovered and rectified, normal operations cannot resume. There will be a potential slowdown in production near the accident site, significantly the closer you get to the accident. This is largely due to fear of a repeat accident in the neighboring areas. Depending on the part of the process, an accident can totally stop production. Without an alternate line feeder and receiver, processes will grind to a halt. The loss of injured workers and their replacement for operations continues to add to labor costs. As mentioned earlier, this results in a slowdown due to the learning curve for new employees. In Figure 2.6 of your text is an example of a checklist for determining hidden cost of accidents. This checklist gives you an idea of the hidden cost, but a more thorough checklist is likely already available at your company. As the global economy continues to grow, the exploitation of the workforce in neighboring developing nations is increasing, as well as the number of fatalities. In a system still practicing slavery and child labor, it is difficult to relate the value of health and safety. When a worker is seen as expendable and easily replaced, it's hard to communicate a less toxic environment and personal protective equipment for the workplace is profitable. Worldwide, there are 25 million people trapped in forced labor, with 16 million of these being exploited in the private sector, such as domestic work, construction, or agriculture. 1/4 of modern slavery victims are children. Of those victims, forced labor, of the victims of forced labor, 58% are women and girls. State authorities hold 4 million persons in forced labor. The United Nations International Labor Organization in 2001 produced the ILO guidelines on occupational safety and health management systems. The publication is ILO-OSH 2001. Its purpose was to encourage governments and employers to recognize the positive benefits and impact on productivity by observing reduction in hazard and risk, introducing occupational safety and health management systems at the organizational level. However, the ILO guidelines are not legally binding and depend on national laws and regulations or accepted standards for enforcement. Political pressures by consumer nations may be the only means to force these nations who are not in compliance with applicable safety and health standards to realize the necessity of implementing international occupational safety and health standards. Okay. Shorter this time, that concludes this lecture on accidents. Of course, we'll get into this more in depth. Again, here are the references that I have used. In the event that you want to look a little bit deeper into any of the subjects, from your text or from my lecture notes is where any of the quizzes will be coming. You can also use those working on your reports, and those will be available on the class website. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at the next one.